Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danilo from the King Realty Group. Hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a very, very special session, guys. This is the inaugural session of Real Talk with KRG, the King Realty Group, and Danilo, myself, who's going to be hosting these interviews. What we're going to be doing is we're bringing on experts, and we're going to talk about their expertise when it comes to the real estate market, and it's going to give you a lot more valuable information and really just give you, shine some light on what's going on in the GTA market from the standpoint of experts in their field. I'm really, really happy and glad that we got some time with Mike Clark from Korman and Company, which is a lawyer in downtown Toronto. We have used them for my own personal clients in the past as well, and I know that they really have a pulse on what's going on in the real estate market. Our topic right now, especially because we're obviously impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic across the world, want to know, are transactions closing? What's going on with Landlord and Tenant Board situations? What's going on with assignment sales? What's going on with closings? What's going on with key exchanges? These are all the things we're going to be talking about in this hour session. It's jam-packed with a lot of information. You're probably going to learn a lot of things, so take out your pen and paper and take some notes, guys. This is the number one Real Talk with Mike Clark. Enjoy. Okay, Mike, thanks for joining us. We got Mike Clark here from Korman and Company. They're real estate lawyers in Toronto. Say hello, Mike. So yeah, they've Korman and Co has been around for a while. I know a lot of people in my office and many real estate agents in the city use you guys for a lot of residential real estate, commercial real estate as well. I know you guys do well as well with pre-construction. So you're definitely a good person to speak to when it comes to understanding how our real estate market is currently. Obviously, a lot of the hot topic right now is the acceleration of this. Unfortunately, the acceleration of this virus kind of spreading globally, and it's caused us to kind of shift the way that we run our business. And you know, specifically for real estate, it's definitely impacted us in many different ways. You know, the most obvious ones are being restricted from showing and you know, promoting our properties the way that we normally do. Open houses have been canceled. You know, one-on-one showings, physical showings have been discouraged now, and rightfully so, because we're trying to, again, the bigger concern is the health risk, and we want to limit that in Ontario and Canada, right? So I understand. Now, because of all this, though, a lot of people have been adjusting. Obviously, a lot of non-essential, whatever that means, non-essential work. People are staying at home. However, people who are still needing to work, like for us, for example, real estate is considered essential because there are still people who need to buy and sell. You know, you guys are still operating as well. So we're going to talk about how this situation has impacted our jobs. Is that okay? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. And the good news is that we have Mike here on a pre-recorded session. We're going to ask some very good questions that have been compiled from a few different people. And in the end, if there's some questions that we may not have answered here, we're going to be able to reach out to Mike later and get that stuff answered. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that. Okay, perfect. So let's dive into it. I mean, first of all, how are you feeling? Hopefully you're safe. Hopefully family is safe. Thank you for coming on, by the way, and you know, providing your time. How are you feeling? How are things going for you in this time?
So, you know, I just like to say that my office is fully open. You know, we're able to work from home, that sort of thing. So although the front door is closed, we are very much open for business. And for the most part, all the deals are closing. So, you know, being a lawyer, I've got stuff that's still in the pipeline where the deal was signed up, you know, 1 or 2 months ago before the current crisis really kind of ramped up. So, you know, we're a bit lagging behind in that respect. So we're maybe busier than the market is, like on your end as a realtor.
Sure.
But nonetheless, you know, a lot of clients of mine, they're worried that their deals won't close for this reason or that reason. And by and large, we are finding that all of those fears are unfounded. Deals are closing. Banks are funding mortgages. People are able to get new mortgages. We're able to wire funds between lawyers. We're able to get documents signed up virtually. So we don't need to have people into our physical office space face to face. Yeah.
So that's a good one right there, because you know, a lot of people do assume that lawyer has to physically or they need to witness your signatures on signing day, buyer or seller side. So you're saying that virtual or e-signature is being allowed, or is that has that always been the case?
So what's going on is realistically, DocuSign and those sorts of electronic signature programs might work in some limited circumstances, but by and large, it's still a little bit cumbersome of a situation because of that requirement to watch someone sign documents. That still exists. The change now is that the Law Society has temporarily adjusted their interpretation of the law to say that a face-to-face signing does not have to be in the physical presence of somebody else. So, Danilo, for example, this is face-to-face over video, you and I. They're considering that to be the same person right at this moment in time as physical presence was beforehand. So it's something that is allowing everybody to operate right now. But I suspect when everything's done, we'll go back to normal. But hopefully, video chats will still remain a possibility. But I don't foresee that happening. The law and the courts, they just moved so slowly to
fully allow that.
To get onto new technologies and things like that. They're really not sure. So I'd say maybe where the courts have hit maybe 1900 at this point in their thinking, and the rest of society is now maybe only 120 years
later.
Beyond the courts.
Exactly. They're on top of the new stuff.
Well, maybe that's not true. They've caught up to fax machines. Okay. But that's fundamentally what we're dealing with. So to answer your question, yeah, we are now allowed to do that document witnessing over video chat, which is very, very helpful because, if I've got the sniffles or something, I don't have to subject my clients to it and vice versa. So it's a lot safer for everybody. And that's really how lawyers are doing it right now.
I gotcha.
And I would expect that to continue for the duration of the crisis.
Now so let me ask, you're on a video chat with your client, you got to do a signing, buyer's there to do his signing for his purchase. The signing then, is the method through DocuSign?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It's pen to paper.
So you got to see
paper. You got to watch them. You got to tip the camera down and you got to see them sign the document.
I see.
As best you can. Obviously, there's limits to the technology and clarity of what
I got you.
Actually see.
No, I get the gist of it. There's nothing that exists for it yet, and you're also saying that because changes move so slowly in the Law Society, you predict that after this is all said and done, you're going to be required to physically be there again.
I think so. Here's hoping the genie is out of the bottle and we won't be able to put it back in. That would be fantastic. But no, I think fundamentally we're going to revert back to in-person signings. Part of one of the reasons DocuSign is not necessarily going to fly is I can't.
Anyone can sign.
The way the law works is I'm supposed to watch the person sign the document, and I'm supposed to confirm as a lawyer that person isn't in any other danger or duress, or being forced to sign. They're doing it of their own free will. All this kind of thing, which is a little difficult to do over video chat because you can't necessarily see who's standing behind the camera. You can't tell what is in the environment of the person on the other end of the video feed. Whereas you can if they're physically in your office. I know who's sitting in my office and who isn't.
You can tell if they're 5 beers in. You can tell if they've had a few drinks in if you see them physically, but over video, this guy could not remember what he signed last night.
Couldn't already, and so it's things like that. It's still fundamental to a lot of banks. So even though the law might allow you to do something, there's so many players in these real estate transactions that somebody else could decide they don't want an e-signature from DocuSign. Fundamentally, what we're doing is realistically, you've got to print the paperwork out, you've got to sign it with a pen to paper, and then you've got to scan it back to the lawyer, or courier it back to the lawyer. So it takes a little bit of extra time, and it is kind of cumbersome. So notwithstanding the electronic meeting like this, we're still reverting to some old-fashioned things there. So you just got to keep that in mind. You might have to get a printer. If you don't have a printer and scanner at home, you might actually have to go buy one just for completing your deal. And it just is what it is.
And the truth is, you know what? A lot of people don't have those things. It's funny, like, because of DocuSign and things like that. See, there you go. So a lot of those things people don't even really have in home anymore. It seems to me that a new cartridge for your printer costs as much as the printer nowadays. And you know what I mean? And so only a person like me who does print stuff from time to time would go out and get it, because otherwise people are going PDF, they're going paperless, et cetera, et cetera. But I understand now why, it seems like it probably would revert to old-fashioned ways. It's a little bit quicker to come into the office, physically see it, the copies are there, the staff is there to make the copies, no couriers involved, no delay in time. You just got to come show up to your meeting and we're good to go, right? Okay, perfect. So that's good. That's a good question to kind of answer. And you actually said earlier that by and large, majority of your deals are it's business as usual. Things are closing just fine. Having said that, though, are there issues that have arisen that are a little bit unique to this situation that you've seen? Commercial, residential. Actually, let's stick more residential or pre-construction. Those are really the two.
Sure. So let's just say that the main issue right now with pre-construction is, of course, a lot of builders have now activated their unavoidable delay wording in the contracts. So that fundamentally means they're bumping closing dates that are near at hand, and they don't know when the new closing dates are going to be. And you can ask them until you are blue in the face when the new closing date will be, and they will not tell you. They will just point the finger back at the unavoidable delay paperwork and say, whenever this is done, then we'll figure out what your new closing date is. And they're not liable for delayed closing compensation for the period of time that the unavoidable delay lasts. Okay, so that's another thing, is that that may be very, very inconvenient, because particularly for people who are moving from an existing property resale into a new construction and they're trying to time those two deals, that can be a problem now. It's, all bets are off on when that new construction is going to actually complete, but you can't do anything to your existing contract to sell your current place. That is locked in stone. So unless you can negotiate a new closing date, you're stuck. You may have to sell one place, move out of it, find temporary accommodation, and then move into the new place once it's ready. So I do have a couple of clients caught in that situation right now. It's not fun, but there's always a way through it. Now,
I think prior to all of this happened too already. These situations already happened, like that unavoidable delay. You agreed to that many years ago, right? And if you're at the point of close to occupancy, I can see how this could impact your occupancy date, or you moving in. And then I get what you're saying. So people got to be really careful then if they're looking to sell their place. There's a lot of other concerns in terms of selling right now, aside from this. But like if there's a contract in place because you thought occupancy was coming up and then they bumped it out a bit more, I can see that being a little bit of an issue.
So that's one thing on the new build end. Otherwise, these deals are closing as usual. And again, the builders' lawyers have been fairly flexible in allowing electronic copies of documents to be used instead of the usual giant physical stack of originals. They want everything in multiples, and all paper with, hand signatures. That's the normal. Now they're allowing copies, like PDF versions of all that paperwork instead, so the deal still closes scheduled. And then on resale, look, it's just, there's so many moving parts to a normal transaction that somebody is going to be adversely affected somewhere along the line by the current situation, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's use keys. Normally, keys would be transferred between lawyers' physical offices. A buyer would go into the buyer's lawyer's office on the day of closing to pick up the keys at the end of the day. The lawyer's offices are closed. So that is not happening. And, my office, I don't have a big enough doorknob to put 50 different lock boxes in there with 50 different sets of keys.
Right.
It's just not possible. So that process has had to change. And one of the things that we are doing is asking agents one of the buyer or seller's agent to leave a lockbox at the property for the buyers to go get on the day of closing. But that's a whole lot of extra organization that didn't used to happen.
Sure. I've seen that clause, actually. I saw that clause already being used. Seller to leave the lockbox in place after closing with the key, a copy of the key, so that the person can access it with the same code that it was before, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's one of the ways we're getting around that particular issue, but it requires a lot of organization. And, there's still situations where it just can't be done. So if there aren't sufficient lockboxes to do this, then we've got to come up with a different scenario. But, having these keys is very, very difficult to hand over person to person if you can't meet the person. Because
obviously,
one situation that could cause a delay. Maybe it might take an extra day or
but it's good
to keys to the buyer beyond the closing date. There's these sorts of things to keep in mind. Same with lenders. Lenders are having to adapt all of their internal processes as well. And some of them can adapt more easily than others, just based on what they've got to do normally on their end. And so every deal, we're having to, reinvent the wheel, as it were, on standard closing procedures. So, everything is taking significantly longer to do, than it would normally take. But that doesn't mean there's more time in the workday.
No.
So, there may be small delays, but as I said, things are closing. They might not close the actual day of. Some deals might close the next day or the day after, just by the time all the pieces are in place. But, by and large, nobody's losing their deal or getting noted in breach of contract because of this situation. So it's a little stressful, but, you can account for this by not having movers move you the same day as the closing. Right, leave a little bit of a buffer if you're a buyer.
So that's a good question.
A little bit early. Yeah,
that's a good point to make. In this scenario, would it make sense for a buyer seller, someone who's doing both? Would it make sense for them to try to close on their purchase first with a bridge loan, hopefully, so that they can kind of like get in their purchase and have a little bit more time before they actually have to sell, close on their sale? Does that kind of make sense? And
so basically, that's right. You want to stagger the closings. It's really not a good idea to have two closings happening on the same day anymore, because as I was talking about the delays, it's difficult to wrangle a deal closed early enough in the day to still allow enough time for the next deal. And so I would stagger them, whether you sell first and then buy second, or you buy first with a bridge loan and then sell. You really want to be able to prepare in advance for that kind of scenario, just to avoid a surprise later on.
Yeah, it's situational though, right? Because not everybody may have the ability to do that, especially if they, you're suggesting us to close their sale first and then buy a couple of days later. They may not have anywhere in between to kind of stay. There's a lot of things that people need to consider there. It's very situational, a lot of moving parts. But no, I definitely understand that as well. Now, we did talk about like the lock blocks clause. Are there any clauses that people should be putting in their deals? You don't have to read it out loud, like word for word, but like just to get a gist of some stuff that some buyers and sellers are putting in there to protect themselves in case, land registry office is not open, we're not able to close on the same day for whatever, out of our hands scenarios, right?
So yes, there are absolutely some clauses that you can put in. And what you have to be careful though is that if you put in clauses that allow one deal to be moved, you have to make sure similar mirror clauses are in the other one. Okay, because you don't want one deal with the capacity to be mobile and the other one just fixed, because you could find yourself in a pickle if one party activates that closing date moving clause, and then rearranges everything to such a point that you endanger the other deal. So
Right.
you do,
and there's a chain link there, right? There could be so many connected deals.
Yeah.
Buyer, seller, buyer, seller, buyer, seller, you know.
And
so
it
I get it.
Total nightmare, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is that these clauses, it's very difficult to make them very, very general, okay, in terms of enforceability. So in order to make something legal enforceable, it really needs to be clear. You have to know exactly what that clause means. So if you're creating a what if situation, let's just say you want to move the closing date in the event the buyer becomes ill. Well, you have to define it. And then you have to say, how long do you get to move the closing date? But that length of time, you're just guessing, right? And you're guessing at the type of illness, you're guessing at the symptoms. So if you say something like, the buyer shall have the unilateral right to move the closing date 14 business days in the event they are diagnosed with COVID-19, something along these lines. Sure, fine, very clear. Except, what happens if you can't get a diagnosis from the government because they're too slow at testing?
Right. You're still opening it up.
Yeah, you're opening up, right?
Too many things.
So buyer's still sick. Buyer still might not be in, have the physical capacity to sign documents or whatever, or go in and arrange their mortgage or what have you, because they're on their back and can't do anything, or potentially even hospitalized, but still don't have a test in hand that would be required to legally activate that COVID-19 clause. So then you've got to arrange it in such a way that it's a little bit more general, but then you open it up more. So you can see how the problem arises here with these kinds of clauses is you're inviting future problems. When you give people these rights to move things around unilaterally.
I think it would be a little risky. I don't know if you agree. It would be a little risky.
It works in certain circumstances, okay? But you have to, it's not just, oh, this COVID-19, I need a bunch of clauses about COVID-19 in my contract. No, you do not. Unless there is an extreme risk of something serious happening. So if your buyer is a healthcare worker, that person might need some kind of clause, right? If the person is a seller, and that seller lives in a nursing home, they might need a clause. Or in that case, maybe you want to have a power of attorney prepared for somebody who's not in a high risk category. Right? So there's other ways around it that don't just involve, some clause that tries to predict the future being put in, that then puts you at risk of the future not unfolding exactly the way the lawyers foresaw when they wrote the clauses. So agents got to take note.
Agents got to take note to be careful on what clauses they're putting in there. And it seems like it should really be custom to the scenario of your client. First off, I have seen like a more general clause been floating around on different contracts as of late, but it more speaks to having title insurance, having gap coverage, and it more speaks to being able to close on the next available date to close.
Next available date.
Yeah.
Yes. And again, there's problems with everything. So that clause, guess what? A bank is not going to be ready to close with one 24-hour notice. Like fundamentally, it's not happening. And most lawyers' offices, I don't think, could turn it around that fast either. So what happens with that clause is if you're saying it's the next available business day where everything can happen, you know, I've seen some of these clauses, so I know the ones you're talking about here.
Sure.
The fundamental issue is, first of all, if tons of people have that clause, there's going to be a sudden flood of closing in one day. So most of those people aren't actually going to close that day.
Right.
And you're going to be in breach anyways, despite the clause, and have to negotiate something. But, you know, fundamentally, there just isn't enough time. You'd realistically need, like, if you're going to use a clause like that, you want to say 5 business days after, you know, it becomes possible to register a deal or whatever it is.
Right, because that would be more realistic time frame.
More realistic time frame, because you know, I have seen these clauses, and it's just, yeah, they potentially create a situation that is impossible to actually adhere to.
Fulfill or adhere to. Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah, see, I didn't just looking at it, reading it, it seemed to make sense. But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense as well, because if the land title registry office is not able to process, right, and everyone has this clause for this next day, then everyone's going to be flooded on that day. Like, a lot of people won't be able to actually fulfill. I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, anybody closing in that time frame that it was closed is going to that next day.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, I don't see the land titles office closing.
No.
Currently, they're on the essential services list. And I know Jeff Lem, who runs the show at the land registry office, has basically said that the e-reg electronic registration situation, and I'm paraphrasing here, will only close over his dead body. So, you know, this guy is adamant that it remain open, and, you know, he's really done a very good job of getting everything onto a cloud-based system so that a situation like this would not shut them down.
Right.
So it's all, the system is in cloud. Like, it is fully internet-based. So I can register a deal from anywhere in the world with an internet connection. And that's the point, so that a situation like this, it shouldn't theoretically be a risk to the land titles office. And so, yeah, anyways, Jeff's trying to keep the show going on. And
I gotcha.
I'm not really worried about that one. It's more like potentially other more restrictive requirements on banks and, you know, these kinds of organizations, where if the banks end up having to shut branches, practically speaking, it will be very difficult for people to move money around. It can still be done by wire,
electronic,
but a lot of my clients, like my wires with business banking and trust accounts and like all the, you know, protocols in place for lawyers, I can zap a wire almost instantly. A normal person who doesn't have business bank, just has a normal person's, you know, retail account at a bank, that person's wire could take several days. Like, I've got clients right now who sent their wires on Tuesday, and it's Thursday. We don't have the money.
Yeah. Right? It could take a few business days. All depends on the institution as well.
It depends on the institution, and they're overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
Their wire departments are not used to this kind of traffic. So they're really struggling to process everything, because there's still a human in the mix. Even though you might have pushed the button, like literally, on a wire, it doesn't mean that there's no human involved to check it somewhere in, you know, between
in that process.
Point B. And yes, and so that's, things are kind of slowing down there. And so that, I'd see that maybe being as the biggest risk right now. But, you know, who knows? The situation evolves so quickly and so frequently.
There's been a lot of changes over this last couple of weeks that were not anticipated about a month or two ago. So for things to continue to change, that is a very, very real possibility. But I think the positive stuff that I'm getting from our conversation so far is the fact that a lot of people have done the right things to adjust. Land titles is online, and those, you know, likely that'll continue to be up and running. Lawyers are working from home, and law society is accepting, virtual conversation signings, which is great. There could be some issues with pre-construction, occupancy, and delays in construction, and a little bit time frame delays. Same with residential, that could be a thing as well. We have some clauses that are available that might be nice to have in your contract, but at the end of the day may not actually work in the way that you think that they will at the end of the day. But I think a lot of people are also acting reasonably and are understanding.
That's ultimately what it takes. People just have to be reasonable. And, I can tell a court is also going to look for reasonable actors. So, I really would not want to be that seller going to court when the buyer can't close on the day, trying to say they should be able to terminate the agreement. I've already spoken to litigation lawyers about this specific thing for various clients of mine. And that is also their impression, is they would not want to be the lawyer taking that in front of a judge saying, well, Your Honor, the contract was breached. I want to enforce my rights against this other person who couldn't close solely because of the COVID-19 situation. Good luck to you. I think
that's unreasonable, right? You guys agreed to a contract. At one point. You came to a point where the party couldn't finish because of unforeseen circumstances. You gotta try to keep it together as much as you can. And right.
And it's really a push to try to keep the deal together, and the parties really need to act reasonably in the circumstances to keep the deal together. In some situations, it may be totally impossible to keep the deal together. For example, in a job loss situation, a buyer might lose their job, might then lose their financing, and that's it. They're fundamentally incapable of closing the deal in some cases, though not all, because a lot of banks, as of a certain cutoff date, are still funding mortgages even when the buyers don't have jobs.
Okay, so that's interesting too. That's a
thing that's happening, but
that's another conversation I'm going to have, with a mortgage partner that we normally work with. So some lenders are a hard stop on people temporarily laid off, unfortunately. And I had some clients kind of in that same sort of mix. And it sucks because, you're approved one day and you're not another because the government has imposed non-essential work to stop. And so businesses they have no choice but to lay people off on EI. And now a lender's looking at this file and not considering the income. And I know this is happening. And so this is alludes to your point of that could be a real reason as to why a contract may not be completed. But I am going to have a quick chat with our mortgage partner as well on these same topics and kind of see what he's seeing as well. But on your end, have you come to a situation where a borrower wasn't able to close because of financing? I know that could happen in a regular day, but I don't know if that's happening a lot more now.
Yeah, and it's coming up, but so far, fingers crossed and knock on wood, I've been able to wrangle every deal closed. Whether it's by extending or what have you.
Sure.
I do have one deal that really has just fallen apart because of this situation, but it was on the rocks before. It was already in trouble before the COVID-19 situation kind of took over the
so to speak, yeah.
So I wouldn't really count that one, but
sure.
Shall we say normal deals that were all proceeding as usual, that they can close, and it's requiring some short extensions to just allow banks a little bit more time to process things, or worst case scenario, allow a mortgage broker to quickly work their magic to get another mortgage lined up. But that's a bit longer of an extension, but nonetheless, we're able to do it right now. People are landlords being very accommodating of that. And
that's good.
Look, when it comes to financing, where there's a will, there's a way. There is so much money chasing borrowers these days. You don't have to think that just because you walked into your local CIBC branch and you didn't fit into the neat little boxes that CIBC and frankly
there's other lenders out there
like to put you in, Maybe your situation is a little unusual because you're self-employed and right now the banks are worried about your income, this kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that the bank across the street wouldn't like you.
Of
right?
course.
So
Yeah.
people think, oh, I walked into my branch and they couldn't give me a mortgage. That's it. Absolutely not. That's only step one. Now you got to talk to a mortgage broker, and most of the time, there's still some mortgage available, so long as you have an income, or at the very least, a prospect of an income in the near future.
For sure.
There's always a way. It's just it's who you ask and how much you're willing to pay for the privilege of borrowing money.
Well, that's great. Look, I mean, I think so far I've been hearing a lot of good news, right, from you and what we're talking about. I think
it's positive.
No, I hate to throw a wrench into it, though.
Yeah,
I hate to throw a wrench into it, but there's an elephant in the room for sure, and I think a lot of people are concerned about this. It's landlord tenant situations, and closing with tenants, for example. A lot of anyways, this could be skewed because I might be hearing a lot of the problems versus a lot of the situations that are fine. But I'm hearing a lot of issues with tenants not wanting to leave, even in a situation where you have a bona fide buyer, even prior to all this, gave a 60-day notice. I'm buying this house now, I'm moving in, and yet tenant is not allowing for revisits on a property and doesn't want to leave at the end of the 60 days on closing day. I'm thinking that could be an issue right now. I don't know.
And it is. You're right. So fundamentally, the rule is tenants have to pay rent. So there's no rent holiday. The issue is that the Landlord Tenant Board is not processing evictions. So there's no way to enforce an eviction notice for failure to pay rent. That is different. So a tenant who doesn't pay rent simply racks up a debt to the landlord and risks being kicked out later once the Landlord Tenant Board starts sitting again and hearing cases. But that aside, it's really just up to the landlord and the tenant to work something out as sensible human beings, and not resort to the Landlord Tenant Board to solve their problem for them. So there's lots of things you can do. I have clients who are charging half the rent on the first of the month, and then they're waiting for the tenant to get their EI payment or their CERB payment from the federal government, wage initiative that's been, ongoing for the last few weeks now.
For sure. Yeah. Well, know about it.
To roll in, then the tenant pays the other half of the rent. Or they're making a deal where there is no rent payable, for example, for the next 3 months. And then the tenant will pay that rent back over the next year of the lease.
Sure.
Things like that. But it's just about working it out. And as a landlord, you want to know what the tenant is doing. You want to know how your tenant is, because you don't want that tenant to, out of the blue, bounce a check, and then you've got to pay your mortgage payment the next day.
So I think this is a lesson as well to really know who your tenant is. First of all, there should be a qualification process at the onset of you agreeing to have them as your tenant. First of all, you need to kind of know what's going on. And I know that I've sent some communications out to landlords that I know. I'm a landlord myself. In order to just be in touch with your person early, and trying to figure out what the problem is, being clear that obviously everyone's affected by this, not just tenant but also landlord, and smaller landlords, definitely more than bigger landlords that have many properties, or even property management companies, and to just be understanding that no one should be sitting back and trying to take advantage or benefit from the situation. We really should be helping each other and come from a solution-based approach, trying to find out, if you can't pay right now, I understand, and what can we do to kind of rectify this? And so, there's a lot of stuff going on with that. I think at the end of the day, even though evictions are stopped at the moment, they will continue in the future. Although it could take a lot longer, and you may be out of pocket for a lot longer as a landlord, there's still light at the end of the tunnel through the right route. Taking the right route, right? So, you can always say, hey, look, this is not stopping forever. And like you were saying, there's no forgiveness really. If I have to defer my mortgage, it doesn't mean my mortgage is forgiven. I actually have to pay it back with additional interest.
It's still racking up in interest and everything.
With additional interest, and a lot of lenders as well aren't even giving that to rental properties, period. They're not even letting you defer rental property payments as well. So some lenders are doing that as well. So, you know, that it's this whole thing.
Yeah.
That's it. And so, you know, it's unfortunate because you mentioned before, you're like, well, you got to figure it, you got to come to some sort of agreement between you and landlord and tenant. And that's the variable that's a little bit scary for a lot of people. And, you know, when it comes down to a situation where you have a final agreement and a buyer is supposed to move in a month and the guy doesn't leave and you have no recourse, that becomes a little tough. But again, it comes down to the same thing. You know, as a seller, you may be in a tough position, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. And you know, to your point earlier, the question about what happens if you're a buyer of a property and it's tenanted and that tenant doesn't want to leave. You know, let's just take an extension of the conversation we just had. You can't make that tenant leave.
No.
You do have a right as a buyer to ask them to go, but right now you can't enforce your right. So if that tenant doesn't want to leave on closing day, the seller is in breach of contract, just as they always would be for failing to provide a vacant property. And the buyer, unfortunately, you know, can choose not to close and not to take over that tenant because the basic real estate contracts, they haven't changed. So again, it's just a situation that's going to have to be worked out sensibly. And for example, you know, I have clients in like normal times who would approach the tenant and just say, look, you know, the buyer has the right to boot you out and we don't have to pay you anything. They have the right to file this form, give it to you, and then you got 60 days to get out. But, you know, I'm a good guy. Why don't I give you a month's free rent? Or why don't I pay you the cost of what it's going to cost you to move? And would you mind, you know, it's just about being creative and figuring out what the problem is with the tenant. Oh yeah, I think I'm a little bit behind. Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to plug my computer in.
Yeah, I got a little choppy there. As soon as you were about to give your secret sauce, then
my secret sauce.
Yeah, you were about to give the suggestion, and it got choppy there. But basically, what you were saying is,
okay. Here, give me 1 second. My computer's about to run out of juice.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So yeah, like
what I was hearing anyways, where it started getting choppy was just that you know, landlord and tenant have to get creative. And I think you know, on the landlord side, and I feel for a lot of the smaller landlords that are really relying on these rent payments. But again, it goes back to knowing your tenant, et cetera, et cetera. But like you know, it comes down to sometimes you gotta kind of pay them. You know?
Yeah. No,
yeah.
Exactly. And look, some of my landlord clients, what they've done in the past, you know, works great now. So they'll tell the tenant, look, the guy I've sold to, they have the right to boot you out. They just have to serve you the notice and you got 60 days and you don't get anything. But I'm a nice guy. Would you mind leaving a little bit early? Serve the tenant with the N11 form, which is the mutual agreement to terminate a lease, and then say, look, I'll pay for your movers, or I'll give you a month extra free rent that you wouldn't otherwise, you know, be entitled to.
Right.
Something along these lines, and you can still help the deal go through. But it's all about speaking to the tenant, figuring out what their issues are, if there are any, because quite frankly, right now, it may be incredibly difficult for a tenant to find a property because, as you're saying, like there's not a lot of showings. Like you're not going to go be able to traipse through, particularly condo buildings where, you know, one by one, property management companies are locking these buildings down because they don't want the general public traipsing through for open houses or even private showings of units.
We got a list of buildings. We got a list of buildings that have
the owners in the buildings.
We got a list of buildings that aren't allowing showings right now, period.
Yeah. And it's only getting bigger, that list. right?
Yeah.
So that's going to affect tenants too, who won't be allowed to go and view view rental properties. So, I think landlords have to understand, sellers have to understand that it may be impossible or impractical for a tenant to actually leave, and they might have to help.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I understand. It's a little bit tough out there, and for any buyer as well, they need to really be paying attention or asking questions, especially if there's a house that's tenanted, what the situation is with that tenant. Is there a possibility of them not leaving at the end of the, when closing day comes? I think those are all very real questions that every buyer agent should be asking the seller agent, if the property is tenanted currently. Because I think these things are, hopefully anyways, that we don't have this drag on too long. By the virus situation here in Ontario and Canada, hopefully it does, what we're doing is flattening the curve and kind of limiting that whole spread, and we get back to normal as soon as we can. But in the situation where that doesn't happen so quickly, we need to really be careful about these type of transactions that involve tenants. Yeah. No, perfect. You know what? Would there be anything else that you may want to add? I know we talked about a pretty broad things. Broad topics related to residential real estate. But I'm just wondering if you had any other thoughts, maybe you'd like to add before we cut off here.
No, really. Look, in a nutshell, everything we've been talking about boils down to being reasonable and sensible. And it really behooves both parties to behave like adults. And now is not the time to be fighting over petty sorts of things. And people have got to be a little bit more creative than usual to get the deals done. But their deals are closing. And look, now may be a great time for buyers to go out and look for something, right? Because a lot of buyers are not looking right now, which means the likelihood of you getting into a bidding war right now is lower. And you can have the time to think about your potential purchases, these kinds of things. There's not going to be as much pressure. So I think things like that, if you look on the bright side here, there's always opportunity to be had, and it's just something else to keep in mind.
No, for sure, and I do appreciate that. I think in the immediate short term, meaning in the next week or two, not a lot of people are probably going to be out there. Unless they're very, unless they really need to, in terms of buying. But you're right. I mean, in the coming months, real estate moves super slow. And so the impact of this on real estate prices is yet to be seen, I would say. But the impact on activity is 100% apparent. We've had some stats where from 1 week to another, it's been a drop in like 70% of showing activity. 70% of showing activity has dropped week after week, which is, incredible. But it speaks to, obviously people listening and not going out there when they don't need to. But you're right. I mean, the economy's pretty much slowed down to a halt. I don't know how many people are going to get back to 100% capacity after this is all done. And so as a buyer, you may be going into an environment where you may be competing with no one or very little people compared to a month ago where you were overbidding and competing against at least 4 or 5 people every single time. So that's changed dramatically. And I'm still working with some buyers that need to buy. And so we're out there and, we're the only guys with offers on houses that were in competition every single time or all day a month ago, and so that is true to what you're saying. So, I mean, look, Mike, I appreciate you spending the time and hopping on to answer some questions. These are questions that I had personally. I have some clients that are kind of in certain situations that this may help.
Yeah.
It's information at the end of the day. Things are running a little bit, business is not business as usual right now. And these conversations are really good to kind of guide people because there's a lot of people who have question marks. And I think a lot of people have a lot of time to be able to kind of go through a lot of this information.
Email account can attest to that this afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So we're okay, Mike. I'm gonna be able to share your information to whoever hops on the webinar that we're gonna do. And anybody who wants questions answered related to this stuff, we're okay to give your info out, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Yeah. And again, appreciate you hopping on. I know you're a busy guy, and so you know, spending some time to answer some questions is great. I do appreciate that. No problem. And yeah, we'll be in touch. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we still have an active deal that might take a few years to kind of complete, but yeah, we'll keep in touch anyways. And yeah, again, keep safe, stay at home. You know, hopefully you and your family are well, and you continue to be well over these times. And just be careful with everything. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. You too. A pleasure.
All right, Mike. Take it easy. Have a great day. Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Great call. Hopefully that information was good for everybody.